I want to, before we close the top part of the show, there's two other grounds I want to cover briefly, and we'll get back to. I want to get to Bernie and the Democratic Party, but the other part that I think was very important that you touch on in your book, and maybe you could just don't necessarily need it's not the main focus. But
I won't give a lecture.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
You can lecture as much as you want. I just don't want to put you on the spot for additional information if you don't have it. But starting in the 30s, it wasn't just that there was a right-wing pushback towards Roosevelt. It was actually the early mechanics of everything we see today. Like, the modern right, to me, so much is essentially a sort of propaganda and PR apparatus. So even if you look at things like Turning Points USA, it's, campus freedom. This is just oligarchs funding some low-rate propagandists to undermine education.
You can a lot of students can get paid to do that kind of stuff.
Right. And this goes back. You talk about how that the corporate sector. This is when they started drumming together the earliest sort of lobbying groups, and PR efforts, and sort of the building blocks of the bugaboos and mythologies and lies go back to this time.
All a series of thoughts coming to mind.
Yeah, please.
So first of all, the wealthiest Americans in 1932, in the campaign that year, probably wanted a Roosevelt victory.
Right.
I'll explain why. Okay. One, because they didn't know what the hell they were going to do with Hoover, but that's beside the point right now. The point is that they feared the possibility of very high taxes being necessary to lift Americans out of the Great Depression. And they figured Roosevelt wins, prohibition will end. We'll tax booze.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Now, these guys, the DuPonts and others, they were, I forgot, I can use four-letter words.
You can always use four-letter words.
So they were pissed.
Right.
Okay, they're pissed.
Oh, I thought you were going to go for something really good.
I do that all the time.
Oh,
I won't let you down. I'll do the other words too.
Yeah, I was excited. Okay. Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're pissed.
Anything you'd like to say about Alan Dershowitz before we proceed?
So they're pissed.
Yes.
So they're pissed because they not only prohibition comes to an end, but Roosevelt's still going to raise their taxes.
Right.
So they organized the American Liberty League.
Already a good tip. Every time you hear liberty or freedom, pretty much unfortunately, that there's an evil group behind it, at least in an American context.
Okay.
Maybe overseas if it's the liberation.
Be careful.
Of
don't
whatever.
go too far. Remember, it's the four freedoms I'm here all on about.
But that's the speech in the book. I'm talking about lobbying groups.
Okay, so they organize and they spend millions on radio shows, on pamphlets, on newsreels, on what's the old thing? Film strips. I mean, they're going all out. The only thing is they couldn't get a grassroots movement going.
Right.
Working people were not going to they weren't going to do it. So it collapses. Now, the other thing they tried to do is they tried to launch a third party down south in particular.
Called No Labels? No. Yes.
Actually, the name for it was the grassroots party. I just blanked on it.
They call it, or the Serve America Party.
Well, I got to tell you that they had their folks out there.
Right.
Huey Long, they had lots of folks out there who might have sounded somewhat radical, but they could underwrite these guys because these guys they couldn't win. The third party wasn't going to win.
Right, but they could.
But they could take votes away from Roosevelt. Right. And they used race heavily.
Right.
There's a cartoon they distributed widely of Eleanor and Franklin out in front of the White House. And it basically was, I'll kiss the N-words, you kiss the Jews, we'll stay in the White House as long as we choose. They were making it out as if the Roosevelts were the Jewish and black president and first lady.
If only it were. But so... Yeah,
so,
and that goes through Ronald Reagan getting his start in politics.
And the honest thing is that Roosevelt had been a New Deal Democrat.
Right.
He was
Reagan had been, yeah.
Sorry, Reagan had been a New Deal Democrat. He was famous at Hollywood parties for being able to, hey, you and he would have gotten along well. You and he would have gotten along well because he was famous for being able to do impressions of FDR in particular.
Oh, yeah.
And, and he knew the four freedom of speech. Look.
I had actually a story that I read about Reagan once was that in the 50s, he was shopping for a seat to run for in around Southern California. And at the time, he was still a New Deal Democrat. And they passed on him because they thought he was too liberal.
Quite possibly. He was he went with Roosevelt. And
it's
he
quite
went with
a depressing one, right?